Before Monty passed, he had the idea for 4 young women with the powers of the seasons. This was conceptualized between volumes 2 and 3, and after Monty's death, Miles and Carrie tried to further develop the idea and introduce it in volume 3. So that explains why, to a lot of people, the idea of the Maidens felt like it came out of left field. Because it did. That said, I really dig the idea of having 4 chosen women who are badasses, each with her own seasonal aesthetic. The execution, however, has left me not caring about the Maidens as much in recent volumes, especially with the introduction of the relics. The more time goes on, the less important the Maidens feel, especially given the relics seem to be the things that spell endgame if Salem gets them, not the Maiden powers. But beyond even plot details, I just feel the Maidens themselves are a waste. They're boring. There's a lot you can do with the ideas of what each season represents, how these powers manifest differently, and how each one of them are integral to the story and its themes. Yet with every volume, the Maidens feel more and more like something tacked on to the story, with superficial rule of cool powers that aren't so cool anymore, and maybe they never were to begin with. Not the way that they were shown to us. So today I'm gonna talk about my problems with the Maidens in terms of plot, story, and theme, and by extension, how those problems are exacerbated by the relics. Powers like those of the Maidens are a common trope in media. Ancient, amazing powers, often of a divine nature, that are reserved for specific people chosen by another force. The first thing that comes to mind would be the Avatar powers in Avatar: The Last Airbender, a show which, as H. Bomber Guy posits in his fantastic video Go Watch It, Ruby takes a lot of inspiration from, specifically in the idea of a reincarnated chosen one with awesome divine power, or at least a power that cycles through different people. There's no external force that chooses the Avatar. Rather, it seems to be randomized, or even destined, as the Avatar spirit is reincarnated across time throughout each of the 4 nations. And the Avatar's duty is to learn the cultures of each nation and use that knowledge to maintain balance and harmony between all peoples. The series explores how being the Avatar is a massive burden on one's shoulders. You have any hopes for choosing your own path in life taken away, as well as your right to be an individual, given your focus is now to protect the collective. We also see how each Avatar before Aang struggled with the burden of the title, and each of their failings. Korok was laid back and passive, which led to his lover being taken from him by a cruel spirit. Kyoshi was ruthless and often killed to maintain peace, a practice which many would find questionable, including Aang, but which Kyoshi herself defends for its end result of keeping people safe. Roku, however, did not want to believe his best friend Sozin had become a conniving emperor intent on colonizing the other nations and turning the Fire Nation into a global empire. This led to an action where Roku would eventually be abandoned by his former friend and left to die, allowing Sozin to wipe out the air nomads in hopes of ending the Avatar cycle permanently, and leaving Aang with a broken world where his people have been wiped out, and he's forced to try and fix all of this at only 12 years old. So the Avatar is much more than just some chosen hero who wields all 4 elements and looks cool while doing it. They are a flawed human being, tasked with empathizing with all people, and are required to sacrifice their individuality and futures to dedicate themselves to keeping the world at peace. And sometimes that requires them to sully their hands, and if their personal failings interrupt that duty, it can leave the world in chaos for their successor. I mention all of this because it's important for story elements like this to have thematic implications. It makes the story far more interesting and gives it purpose. Purpose which resonates with the audience and endears them to the characters, possibly even making them think about the world or life differently than before. The Maidens don't do this. As explained by the show, the Maiden powers were created by Ozpin.
Oz the Hermit, aka Ozmit.
Yes, Ozmit. I'm just imagining the Kermit meme, but with Oz. Like it's Kermit in Oz's suit and a wig, and this is cursed. At some point in the past, He gave them each a share of his magic, essentially turning them into the protectors of each of the relics left behind by the gods. Maidens do not reincarnate, however. Instead, their power moves to a new host, most often a young woman, which the show does not concretely define, at random, with preference to whoever was in the previous maiden's final thoughts before her death. With these powers, the maidens do not receive the memories and souls of their predecessors like Ozma's successors do. The power itself simply chooses a new host independently. Maidens also have access to magic, which exists independently of aura and semblances. Magical powers can range from fire to ice to wind, and can be used even when a maiden's aura breaks. All maidens have the same powers, with the only true difference being which vault they can open that holds the relic they've been charged with. And given the relics are needed to summon the gods back to Remnant, it means once they're out of their vaults, the maiden's primary purpose vanishes. All of this is to say, the maidens are not vital to the story. Not truly. They don't seem to represent any themes or ideas, nor do they provide any kind of commentary of protecting the world or what it means to be an individual dedicated to society. And the fact they aren't unique from each other in terms of powers or values makes their irrelevance all the more glaring. This isn't necessarily an issue in that it makes the story stop functioning. Rather, it makes the idea of the maidens rather shallow and vacuous. There's no real purpose for them. If you remove the maidens, you don't lose any meaning from the story. Just change some plot details about getting the relics, and the story is largely unchanged. Okay, so when I talk about what maidens represent, I mean, what ideas or themes do they explore in the story? Like, you could argue Silver Eyes represent love, and that is explored through Ruby channeling the love that she has for the people in her life and her desire to protect them, which manifests in her ability to tell the Grimm to be gone! The maidens don't really do that by comparison. Like, what makes a spring maiden thematically different from a winter maiden? Yeah, they correspond to different relics, but do spring maidens hold fundamentally different values or personalities or powers from winter maidens? They share the same magical abilities, and the powers themselves choose their hosts either based on their host biases or at random, both of which are independent of any values the maiden powers might represent. Like, the Lamp of Knowledge is kept within the Spring Vault, for example. However, the Spring Maiden power itself does not choose a host based on, say, her knowledge or wisdom, or her valuing the pursuit of knowledge above all else. And this is the case for the other maiden powers as well. So the obvious solution of having the maidens represent the ideas of their respective relics is already thrown out the window. Another idea could be how maidens are a commentary on society's treatment of women and sexism as an institutional system. An idea which could work, given Ruby is a show led primarily by badass women who will shoot you in the goddamn face if you fuck with them. Maidens are forced into this role with no choice of their own, they can't give up the powers until they die, and they were given these powers long ago by a male sorcerer. Maidens, at least from what we have seen from Amber, Freya, and Raven's predecessor, often lead shitty lives once they get their powers, and are either hunted and killed for their powers by the villains, kept under lock and key by those who want to stop that from happening, or both. However, that idea seems like one the show stumbled into rather than intended to actively explore. And I say this because a similar idea was created in American Horror Story Coven, a show which currently owns my goddamn soul.
They say when a new Supreme starts to flower, the old Supreme begins to fade.
In Coven, every generation of witches has what's called a Supreme, who is essentially the baddest bitch, or witch, there is, manifesting all kinds of magic and doing it better than everyone else and looking fucking fabulous while doing it. When a Supreme ages, her successor begins to blossom into her power during her 20s. And as the successor grows stronger, she literally drains the magic and life of her predecessor, leading to the old Supreme's death and the anointing of the new Supreme.
You're weak, Annalie. We both know why. Diabetes, heart trouble, liver failure. As I get stronger, you get weaker.
And spoilers for Coven, the current Supreme Fiona is terrified of dying and wants to live forever. And to bide her time, she keeps trying to find who in the witch school is the new supreme and kill her. Well, most of the time. The one time she actually wants to die, she freaks out who she believes to be her successor and accidentally kills her, and then kind of commits to the murder spree, so, you know. From this storyline, you can extrapolate what the Supreme might be stand-ins for. The way society tends to pit women, especially powerful women, against one another. How it makes women fear losing their youth, and even suggests they ought to be envious of the beauty of younger women. Or maybe it's not about that at all. Maybe it's just the passing of the torch between generations and the fear of death, the fear of aging. After all, when it's revealed who the true new Supreme is, she leads the Coven into a new era of openness and kindness, showing that these powers can be used benevolently. Power does not corrupt, but rather power simply reveals. But regardless, the material is well written enough to allow these interpretations, and also adds a fun dynamic of, you know, tension as Fiona tries to find her successor. There ain't none of that in RWBY. Again, Maidens don't really do any of that. Cinder goes after Amber, yes, but it's simply about wanting power, because Cinder's character has all the depth of a puddle. It definitely could be portrayed as the story of a woman trying to steal another woman's power to benefit herself, to everyone's detriment as she loses her humanity, but Cinder's story really does not convey that idea, or at least it does not convey it well. We never get any indication of who Amber was or what she hoped to accomplish as a Fall Maiden, robbing any real tragedy that could arise from her murder. And on top of that, we still don't know why Cinder wanted these powers, and so unlike Fiona in Coven, who had an interesting story of wanting to escape death, Cinder has nothing. And even in terms of personality, Fiona is so much fun. She's a terrible person, but I love her.
You must provide them innocent.
Oh, she's innocent. Mostly. She killed the neighbor, but the bitch had it coming.
Now, while the idea of it being only women who get these powers could be interesting to explore, that is not to suggest that there needs to be a reason why women get these powers in the first place. Not when men have historically held most of the cards in their favor by default. However, that also begs the question of why the show doesn't want to explore that angle. Why it is women who receive these amazing powers, and how it could explore what it means to be a woman through each different maiden, or even a celebration of the variety of gender. My friend Cinzy, who is a fellow NB, a non-binary person for those unaware, actually came up with an idea to expand upon the idea of the Maidens to all genders, so I'm gonna let them take the stage for right now.
Hello everyone, I'm Chinzy. Yes, the one that Tom keeps referring to in his videos. First off, I'm so flattered that he's mentioned me so often. He's such a frickin' sweetheart. Love you, Tom. He and I have been talking for almost a year and a half now. Holy shit. And we do a lot of discussion on RWBY, the good, the bad, and the dirty. The Maidens are a fascinating concept, but that's all it really is, a concept. The execution of it has fallen so flat, it's become more two-dimensional than a politician. As Tom said, the biggest issue is that the Maidens are just there. They do nothing except act like living keys, and even then the execution is a total disaster. Much like a lot of what happens in RWBY, the writers basically have all of these cool ideas, but instead of narrowing it down to one or two key ideas and fleshing them out strongly, they throw them all in and it's weak as hell. Think of it as being a chef in a kitchen stocked with all of these incredible ingredients. What the RWBY chefs are doing is throwing all the ingredients into a giant pot in the hopes it'll make an amazing stew. But instead you have, let's just say Gordon Ramsay would have a fit.
What are you?
An idiot sandwich.
Idiot sandwich what?
An idiot sandwich, Chef Ramsay.
So as every good fanfic writer knows, the best thing to do when you disagree with canon is to take what's there and go, fuck it, this is mine now. I'm personally working on my own version of RWBY, which I'm calling RWBY Revelations. Amusingly biblical, especially since we're dealing with stopping a grimpocalypse. One thing that did bother me was that for a show that has a lot of amazing main female characters, it lacks in representation of a lot of other things. So I started doing a lot of research into mythology, different religions, and so on, until I realized that I wanted the Maidens to no longer be maidens. First things first was to completely yeet the god of light and god of darkness. Boring concept for gods that I've seen time and time again. You know, the usual being petty, looking down on humans like they're inferior beings. Lame. I knew that in the series, the number 4 is of particular importance. 4 maidens, 4 members in a team, 4 kingdoms, 4 schools, so on and so forth. So I decided that in this case, 4 gods would be more appropriate, and each one would represent a season as well. I also did research into alchemy to find out what were considered pure metals and important planets. This way, each god would also be connected to a maiden, but they're no longer maidens. They're now the oracles. Oracles, according to Merriam-Webster, are people such as priests or priestesses through whom a deity is believed to speak. One of the most well-known is the Oracle of Delphi, who spoke prophecies given to her by the god Apollo. I took that concept and applied it to the former maidens, so that they not only have powers that don't depend on aura or dust, but are also able to communicate with the deity associated with their season. Their powers are also limited to the elemental powers associated with their season. The Fall Oracle can summon and control massive thunderstorms, the Winter Oracle can summon and control devastating blizzards, and so on and so forth. It makes them incredibly strong, but with limits. The biggest change that I did is that the oracles are no longer solely women. Each oracle's gender has to align with the gender of the deity associated with them. Spring is gender fluid, ergo, the spring oracle has to be gender fluid as well. Summer is male, fall is agender, and winter is female. Now, before y'all jump on me about how there are a lot more genders, believe me, I know. I went with what worked best depending on the religious readings I found, and what worked with the seasons as well. Summer and winter have been historically associated with male and female, as evident in the concept of yin and yang. Spring is all about creation, and is also constantly switching weather depending on what feels right. Fall is when you see the end of things, the absence they leave behind, much like how being agender is the absence of gender. My date mate confirmed that, being agender themselves, hey babe, I love you. Also for fun, I added being non-binary as a sort of jack of all trades. Because they don't fit on the gender binary, they can fit in as any oracle. I know that was a lot, so I'm going to try and do a quick summary of what I did. I took the maidens and changed them from being empty concepts to people who represent multiple things and are that much stronger because of it. It also raises the stakes because if someone receives the oracle powers who doesn't align with that deity, there are going to be serious repercussions. Cinder would be actively fighting the stolen fall oracle powers for control, lest they burn her from the inside out. It would also give Penny becoming the Winter Oracle just as much of an empowering moment as the original show, if not more so, because if the Winter deity didn't think she was acceptable, she wouldn't have allowed the power transfer. Well, that's my thoughts on the maidens and how to make them a lot more kick-ass and symbolic than we get in the show. If you want to see more of my stuff, I'll be setting up my channel soon. It's Crystal Dragon Chinsey. Back to you, Tom.
So, the maidens don't really represent anything, whether it be about gender, womanhood, or the values of their relics. But let's explore that last one a bit more, because the way the relics are handled especially damages the maiden's presence in RWBY. The relics are MacGuffins. A MacGuffin is some sort of device that advances the plot, and usually does so independent of any character arcs or action. The easiest way to explain this is that instead of your characters making some sort of choice in the narrative, or their motivations being deeply internal, the MacGuffin provides a cheap external motivation for your characters to do things and engage in conflict. The term MacGuffin has negative connotations, mostly because it's used for cheap conflict with no real substance, as an easy way for writers to tell their story without having to give much thought to the characters themselves. Ideally, you would want the MacGuffin to represent something, usually corresponding with some internal struggle of your characters. That way it is supplementing the story rather than trying to substitute it entirely. The relics in RWBY, however, aren't actually as bad as people make them out to be. At least in concept. Each relic is based on a virtue deemed integral to humanity by the gods: knowledge, creation, destruction, and choice. These themes are then expanded into the powers of each relic. For instance, the Lamp of Knowledge has the ability to answer 3 questions every 100 years. In that sense, the relics do advance the plot independent of the characters, but they at least can be used to expand upon themes that can relate to the characters' stories. Note, I said they can be used that way, because in practice, the show doesn't really do that, but we'll get there. The problem here is the relics have nothing to do with the maidens, and thus make the maidens irrelevant. The gods did not create the maidens to go with each relic, Oz did. Once a relic is taken out of its vault, its powers remain exactly the same regardless of whoever is using it. Like, it doesn't matter whether Spring is holding the lamp or some rando, you only get 3 questions. Thus, once a relic is out of its vault, the Maiden is no longer needed. Along with that, the Maiden powers don't pick hosts based upon these values. Like, imagine if the Winter Maiden powers picked women who displayed boundless creativity, or the Summer Maiden power picked, I don't know, self-destructive adrenaline junkies? That could be fun to explore and make their stories more engaging and thematically interesting. Instead, we only have superficial similarities between these themes and the Maidens. Cinder is choosing to make the same mistakes over and over in pursuit of power, losing her humanity, yes, but couldn't you also argue Raven's story was also about choice to abandon her family and kill a young girl for powers she weirdly should not have wanted in the first place if she wanted Salem off her back? Penny gets the closest to relevance given she was literally created by Pietro, but this subplot of a female Pinocchio proving that she's a real girl by becoming a maiden does not have enough prominence beyond the side comments made by Winter and Ironwood to really sell it as a full exploration. It is more getting your feet wet in these themes rather than full-on diving in and making them cornerstones of your story. As such, Penny is needed to access the Winter Vault, yes, but once the Staff of Creation is out, what keeps her being the Winter Maiden relevant? On a plot level, she isn't needed to summon the gods, and on a thematic level, her ability to receive the powers as an android is not ever made its own topic, nor is the theme of creation really explored with her, nor was it with Freya. Like, here's a random idea. Maybe Freya was an amazing poet or writer or something, and that's why the Winter Maiden power gravitated towards her in the first place. Penny winds up trying to learn about what it means to be human, and she does so by immersing herself in popular pieces of media, primarily books. This could also result from her talking with Ruby and Blake about their taste in books, and Penny might want to give it a shot.
I love books.
Penny stumbles upon Freya's work and forms a parasocial relationship with Freya this way, while also wondering whether these stories and the ideas they carry resonating with her means she's just as human as anyone else, especially since Winter, the successor to Freya that Ironwood had chosen long ago, has no interest in Freya's creations, or any piece of art or media for that matter. And when Penny approaches Freya in the finale and asks if she's okay, Penny tries to ask Freya about her work, maybe a series she never got the chance to finish because Ironwood whisked her away before she could do so, or maybe her dementia made it impossible. Penny quotes Freya, and Freya faintly remembers it, or it really hits home with her. As Freya slips away, that connection between them, through Freya's creations and Penny's appreciation of them, is why the Winter Maiden power picks Penny. And maybe if a maiden holds her respective relic, she evolves from being just a maiden to becoming the season herself. Sort of like an avatar state. Maybe it allows her to channel the spirits of every maiden who came before her. Maybe it not only amplifies her magic, but also increases that relic's powers. Like, instead of only creating one thing at a time, the staff can now make infinite creations, or the lamp grants omniscience, and so on. Or even just the caveat that, to summon back the gods, the maidens must be the ones holding the relics. All of these fix the aforementioned problems of the maidens feeling pointless, and make the story far more compelling. You keep the same badass scene of Penny opening her eyes and displaying the signature aura flames, but you also get further characterization and dynamics between Penny, Freya, and Winter, all while exploring interesting themes that can resonate with people. This is what I mean by the Maiden powers having a lot of potential that the show is not taking advantage of. There's just no real interest in exploring any ideas beyond, oh, this looks cool, or this sounds cool. All this is to say, like most things in RWBY, I love the ideas on display here, but everything feels like a very rough first draft. Like, you took these broad concepts and elements and didn't polish them or expand upon them further, and then threw them in here without really trying to tie them all together. It can be dumb fun for a while, sure, but I don't think the Maidens are going to be sticking with most audiences after the show like the Avatar has. And yeah, maybe you don't have problems with all this, but when people talk about not really caring about the story anymore, I think it has to do with things like this. These ideas that seem cool, but don't really say anything of substance. And these are just my dumb ideas that I may be working on for future rewrites, or rewrites, I guess. But suffice to say, I don't like how the Maidens have been handled, and I'm probably going to continue feeling that way given the writers can't undo all these problems from volumes 1 through 7, or rather volumes 3 through 7. Anyhow, if you enjoyed that video and you would like to see more content like this from me, then be sure to not only subscribe to the channel, but also ring that bell for notifications because YouTube hates creators. Also, please consider, if you are willing and able, pledging your support over on Patreon, which includes access to the private Union of War Discord server for all patrons, $1 a month and up. I'm the Unicorn of War, and I don't know, I'm just trying to survive this Hellfire year, fam. Cheers to surviving.